Hello, good
Assalamualaikum.
morning.
Good morning. Assalamualaikum. Thank you.
Okay.
Will sing the national anthem of the Republic of Indonesia, Indonesia Raya. We would like to request you to all raise. mentioned that we will have some opening addresses. Now we would like to introduce the head of the steering committee of this conference, the Igssci PhD, and invite him to the podium to deliver his welcoming remarks. He is the co-director of the Faculty of Interreligious Studies and ICS. Please, Dr. Igssci.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all, and blessings to the multiverse and all species of the planet and beyond. Salam sejahtera, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Rahayu, Rahayu, Rahayu. A very good morning to you all. Welcome to the 11th International Graduate Students and Scholars Conference in Indonesia. This year's theme is on culture, technology, and social transformation in the quest for human dignity. We are about to start on a 2-day intellectual journey with around 100 speakers and at least 100 registered participants from around the world. We are happy to note that we have 100 speakers from at least 7 different countries: the United States of America, United Kingdom, Japan, India, Singapore, Malaysia, Hungary, and of course, Indonesia. Altogether, the committee this year accepted around 150 abstracts, and we received 150 abstracts and accepted around 100 papers, which goes to show how graduate students and scholars are yearning to come together and talk about big ideas, despite the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. In this instance, I would like to thank the Dean of the Graduate School of UGM, Professor Siti Muhammad, and also the Rector of UGM, Professor Panut Mulyono, for the gracious acceptance of this invitation to this wonderful event. I would like to also thank all of my colleagues, both the academic staff and also the staff members of the graduate school who have helped to prepare this conference. I would like to also convey my special and utmost gratitude to our keynote speaker, Dr. Phillips Felmonte, an old college friend going back when we were still bachelors in Bandung and Jatinangor in West Java. As I recall, we were still lost in the forest of life at the time, searching for the ultimate truth. But of course, we then went on our separate ways. While I came to reside in a remote village in Sleman in Yogyakarta, Phillips, of course, has gone on to be an intellectual celebrity. And I mean this in a very positive way. Going on television and print media, interviews, YouTube, for his work and fine leadership in the Center for Strategic and International Studies based in Jakarta. I've seen Phillips rubbing shoulders with heads of state, ministers, ambassadors, entrepreneurs, and essentially the movers and shakers of the world. Coincidentally, CSIS will be celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, so congratulations to CSIS. I don't know whether or not all of you know this, but under Phillips's leadership, the CSIS has been appointed as the number 12 top foreign policy and international affairs think tank, and number 2 top think tanks in Southeast Asia and the Pacific, according to the 2020 Global Go-To Think Tank Index. Of course, this is a great achievement for CSIS and Indonesia. We could also wish our universities could also rank as high. But one of the reasons for my inviting Phillips is that we at academia also need to listen to those outside of our own institutions and restricted comfort zones. As academics, we are aware that our knowledge and ability to comprehend reality are very limited. Oftentimes, we are unable to see the elephant in the room and are subject to Eurocentrism and Anglo-Saxon imposition in the natural and social sciences, as well as in the humanities. This comes with a heavy price to pay. not only do our academic work seem to fail to catch up with the scientific developments of the world, but we in academia are not very good at communicating our work to even our stakeholders, making our efforts seem ever more irrelevant. Not to mention that our global university ranking remains far from where it should be, despite all of the investments being poured in by the universities. Now, setting aside the global university rankings, we in academia need to listen attentively and truly comprehend the fact that not one single problem of humanity today can be resolved by one discipline, one science, one country alone. Think of climate change, food and security energy, the current COVID-19 pandemic, and the public health crisis. All of these require a more holistic thinking about life and about reality. This is where institutions like the Igssci Graduate School are pertinent. Not many realize this, but we carry the burden of advancing multi, inter, and transdisciplinary sciences and research. In other words, we need to bring down the walls of silence in academia and start to think big. As we speak, there are already numerous research enterprises being done across the world employing big data analytics and artificial intelligence, machine learning systems, smart robotics, drones, and etc. Even in the study of religion and faith communities, where I'm situated, big data is not only useful, but also imperative. After all, when we talk about the people of faith, we are talking about at least 85% of humanity. That is almost 7 billion people. Thus, when we talk about Islam, we are really talking about the lives of at least 1.6 billion people worldwide. But what does all of this technology have to do with humanity? That is the ultimate question. Are we losing our humanity to these technologies and innovative solutions? Already there will be hundreds of jobs and occupations that will be lost, including taxi drivers with the upcoming driverless cars. Having said that, this conference, which we have held for over 10 years, holds an important and strategic place in academia. But to retain its relevance, we need not to focus on scientific knowledge alone, but there are also other systems of knowledge around us, which we can utilize to improve our understanding of reality and the social dynamics occurring all around us. Thus, scientific knowledge, coupled with strategic knowledge and perennial wisdom, which we find in our religious and spiritual traditions, need to be somehow combined. Each has its own unique strengths and also wisdom to achieve the reality that we want to manifest in this world. With that, I would just like to say thank you again to all of your participation and contribution to this intellectual journey to confront the challenges of the future which is upon us. Because the future, as we know it, is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Igssci. Without further ado, we would like to invite Professor Insinyur Siti Malhamah, MSc PhD. She is the Dean of Graduate School, Universitas Gadjah Mada, who has been joining with us in Zoom. And Ibu Malhamah, please. Ibu, I'm sorry, we cannot hear Ibu.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear now?
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh.
Our respectable keynote speakers and invited speakers, Philip Vermonte, PhD, Executive Director of Center for Strategic and International Studies, Jakarta, Associate Professor Paul Martens, Eller University, United States of America, Maharani Hapsari, PhD, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Indonesia, Associate Professor Okamoto Masaki, Center for Southeast Asian Studies, Kyoto University, Japan, Professor Hamidullah Marazi, Central University of Kashmir, India, Professor Michael Northcott, Edinburgh University, and ICRS, United Kingdom. Associate Professor Bill Sims, National University of Singapore, Sri Astari Rashid, artist and former ambassador to Bulgaria and Macedonia, Associate Professor Zida Muhammad, University Malaya, Malaysia, Professor James Hostery, Emory University, and Fahruddin Majeri Mangunjaya, PhD, Universitas Nasional. Honorable Rector of Universitas Gadjah Mada, Honorable Deans, Lecturers, academic delegates from Universitas Gadjah Mada, and from leading universities in Indonesia and abroad, and our respectable distinguished guests and participants. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In line with the new paradigm as a world-class university, Graduate School of Universitas Gadjah Mada has annually been conducting International Graduate Student Conference in Indonesia as an international student publication media. The conference is for academicians, researchers, and practitioners in these graduate schools to exchange knowledge and information in the broad area of social science and technology, and also has a pivotal role in improving research linkages in this region. The theme of this year conference is Culture, Technology, Social Transformation in the Quest for Human Dignity, chaired by Dr. Diki Sofyan and Dr. Zainal Abidin Bakir. This conference presented more than 100 papers discussing about culture, technology, social information, and also matters related to COVID-19. The papers are split into several specific topics which will be presented in 3 plenary and 25 parallel sessions, including recognition of indigenous religions, bioethics and public health, ecological crisis and climate action, food and energy security action, geography, geology and disaster mitigations, religious majority-minority relations, humanity and the meaning of life, community response to COVID-19, limitation and strategy of fulfillment, market fundamentalism and religious conservatism, media politics and artificial intelligence, performing arts and cultural narratives, politics, national resilience and security, power and sustainability, transitioning and tourism sustainability, social, cultural, and technological transformation in the digital era. I highly appreciate all the speakers, presenters, participants, and organizing committee who have worked hard and smart and make the conference realizable. We do hope that this conference will be useful for all participants and their institutions. I hope that this will be continued annually and become our tradition in increasing the quantity and quality of scientific activity. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Ibu. distinguished guests, respected speakers, paper presenters, and participants. It is openly honored to have the Rector of Universitas Gadjah Mada, Professor Insinyur Panut Mulyono, MMDM, to deliver his opening remarks and officially open this conference.
Okay, thank you very much. Could you hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Very good morning. May peace be upon all of you. Our respectable keynote speakers and invited speakers, Philip Vermonte, PhD, Executive Director of Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS Jakarta, Associate Professor Paul Martin, Baylor University, Paku, Texas, United States of America, Maharani Hapsari, PhD, from Universitas Gadjah Mada, of course from Indonesia, Associate Professor Akamoto Masaaki, Center for Southeast Asian Studies, Kyoto University, Japan, Professor Habibullah Marazi, Central University of Kashmir, India, Professor Michael Northcote, Edinburgh University, and ICLS, United Kingdom, Associate Professor Bill Singh, National University of Singapore, Her Excellency Sri Astari Rashid, artist and former ambassador to Bulgaria and Macedonia, Associate Professor Zida Muhammad, University Malaya, Malaysia, Professor James Hosterei, Emory University, Fahrudin Pajeri, Mangunjaya, PhD, from Universitas Nasional, Honorable Dean and Vice Dean of the Graduate School of UGM, Honorable Dean, Professors, Lecturer, and Academia from Universitas Gadjah Mada, Honorable Professors, Lecturers, Academia, Researchers, and Practitioners from leading universities in Indonesia and abroad, Honorable Conference Committee, and our distinguished guests, participant and partner, also ladies and gentlemen. It is a great privilege for me to welcome you all to the 11th Indonesian Graduate Student and Scholars Conference in Indonesia, IGSSCI, Culture, Technology, and Social Transformation in the Quest for Human Dignity, hosted by the Graduate School of Universitas Gadjah Mada. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 crisis has brought about years of change in the way in all sectors and regions do business. Currently, social and physical distancing has been imposed in virtually all countries around the globe, which has effectively impacted human life and living. Governments around the world are racing to find and deliver vaccines to their affected populations. The effect of the current pandemic, however, goes far beyond public health, destroying life, livelihood, career, businesses, and corporations. This has caused some to cause a cable of rich and influential world figures of attempting a global reset of the world. Even prior to the pandemic, technology had become an increasingly important part of the workforce. Business were looking at technology as a helpful means of engaging with customers, allowing some workplace flexibility, and for a way to introduce automation and faster processes. However, the spread of novel coronavirus and the shutdown of in-person meeting for non-essential businesses accelerated this adaptation immensely. It forced companies to look into creative digital solutions so that the organizations could continue to function remotely and continue to serve their client base. Ladies and gentlemen, we are certain that for a while now, you have been continuously hearing news about digital transformation. And you should know that this is because of it a great benefit with the rise of internet, digital technology and social media. The way we perceive and experience the world have drastically been transformed. Through the introduction of augmented reality, design thinking, artificial intelligence, and machine learning system, we are now accustomed to thinking ahead of our time. Through the utilization of such technologies, we are currently able to develop early warning system and a variety to preemptive knowledge system that could prevent and mitigate catastrophes and disaster, both natural and human induced, to save lives and the destruction of infrastructure and private properties. The implementation of technology will significantly help with the retention as well as the achievement of better satisfaction rates. The seminar will be an outstanding example. Our mind has been assailed by torrent of ideas, information, statistic, interpretation, and visions, and it will probably be 2 days. We can shift through them all, consolidate our own personal perspective. There is indeed plenty to reflect upon, and if this in any way enhance our individual and collective contribution to meeting the global technology challenges, then the seminar can truly be a judge success. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we greatly appreciate the support we have received from all participants and partners. Hope this 11 Indonesia graduate student and scholars conference in Indonesia, Igssci give a great contribution for culture, technology, and social transformation in the quest for human dignity. I'm expecting this conference will also provide us better linkage and friendship. By praying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, the 11 Igssci is officially open. Thank you very much. God bless us. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Professor Pan Mulyono, for your insights, kind support, and encouragement to the conference. Now we come to the next agenda. We are very pleased to have Philips Permonte, PhD, Executive Director, Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS Jakarta, who will deliver his keynote address entitled COVID-19 and Us, the Changes in Our Culture, Technology, and Society in the Time of Pandemic and Beyond. And also, I would like to invite the chair of this session, Zainal Abidin Bagir, PhD. He is the head of Interreligious Studies, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and the director of ICRS. To Zainal Abidin Bagir, PhD, and Philip Vermonte, PhD, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Ida. Good morning, everyone, all participants, speakers, the Dean of the Graduate School, the Rector of Universitas Gadjah Mada, lecturers and students of UGM, as well as those coming from other universities. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker for this morning. So Philip Fermonte is the Executive Director of the prominent think tank organization, CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is based in Jakarta, and which has been regarded as one of the top think tank organizations in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and the world. His PhD was in political science from the Northern Illinois University, USA. Thank you very much, Pak Phillips, for accepting our invitation to deliver the keynote speech this morning. The general theme of IJSSCI this year is culture, technology, and social transformation in the quest for human dignity. And for the reason we all know, an important context for the conference this year is the COVID-19 pandemic. So this general title and its context is reflected in the title of the keynote speech this morning, which is COVID-19 and Us, the changes in our culture, technology, and society in the time of pandemic and beyond. Again, very glad, Pak Phillips, to have you with us today, and the time is yours for your keynote speech. Please, Pak Phillips.
Thank you, Pak Dr. Zainal Abidin Bagir, and yang terhormat Professor Panut Mulyono, Rector of the Gadjah Mada University.
Thank you so much.
Yang terhormat, morning Pak, Professor Siti Mahama, the Dean of the Graduate School of Gadjah Mada University. And also I'd like to thank my longtime friend, Dr. Igssci Sofyan, for inviting me to give a keynote speech in this, I think, very timely and important conference with a timely topic as well. Because as we know, COVID-19 is the big elephant in the room. It encompasses all dimensions of our life, our politics, our businesses, and society. And my title of the paper, the title of the paper that I sent to the organizing committee is COVID-19 and Us, the changes in our culture, technology, and society in the time of pandemic and beyond. But before I started, I'd like to highlight a few caveats with my speech. That is, number one, I do not study religion, and number two, I also do not study culture. But what I'm going to do in the next 20, probably to 30 minutes, is that providing all of us with a helicopter view of what, in my opinion, has been happening in the past 1 year in the time of pandemic, and what would be the steps that we need to take in the future. Because scholars, I think, have agreed that this might not be the last pandemic that we are going to face, because there are other challenges in terms of global health problems, natural disasters, and new challenges that we are facing. And then the title of the conference, and I read all the materials for the panels for this conference, cover all these multidimensional aspects of our time today. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic tells us that all countries, either rich or poor, possessing a solid or weak healthcare system, are equally vulnerable to the devastating impacts of the uncontrolled spread of the virus. There are at least two ironies, in my opinion, that this pandemic displays. First, the COVID-19 virus has been spreading at the lightning speed because the world we are currently living in are more connected than ever, mainly because of the transportation technology that have been so much improved in the past few decades. People and goods have been transporting cross-border easily, which was considered mostly beneficial to our globalized world before the pandemic, indicated our fast-moving era. Now, unrestricted movement of people is probably the most significant enabling factor behind the virus outbreak. Restricting people's movement has been the most difficult policy that majority of government across the globe have to enforce in their uphill battle to fight the pandemic. Second irony, the COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to rethink about the relationship between the form of government and the agility of a country in dealing with the pandemic. Before the pandemic, one might assume that established democratic countries are inherently in a better position to be effectively dealing with the pandemic. Democratic countries are assumed, rightly or wrongly, to be intrinsically public service delivery oriented and more responsive to protect the well-being of their citizens. Thus, non-democratic countries would be just the opposite, fail to effectively tackle the pandemic. But this assumption shattered somehow when we look at the performance indicator of countries in the past 12 months. It turns out that non-democracies can also be effective in tackling the pandemic. For example, China has shown an impressive mobilization capacity by the state and also the tight discipline and obedience by the people, by the Chinese people. China becomes the first in and first out of the coronavirus pandemic. The city-state Singapore is another example. Nevertheless, many non-democracies fail to deal with the pandemic effectively. On the other hand, mature and well-established democracies such as the United States can also be incompetent and thus suffer from the devastating impact of the pandemic in terms of number of deaths and infection rates. Millions of US citizens, almost 30 million US citizens have been infected by the virus, and hundreds of thousands had died because of the pandemic, the highest world record, partly due to the incompetent government. However, there are democracies that have proven to be able to effectively combat the pandemic. South Korea and New Zealand are the two prime examples. If form of government could not explain the success or failure, for that matter, of a country in dealing with the pandemic, what could explain? It is certainly a difficult question to answer, given the fact that the pandemic is still apparently a moving target with too many unknowns. Yet, in my opinion, it is safe to say that it is not the form of government, but rather the degree of governance that matters. China, Singapore, South Korea, and New Zealand that I mentioned earlier are countries known to have efficient, disciplined, and effective bureaucracy with strong leadership at the top. Establishing a system of government and building a resilient society that would pass the test in a very difficult time such as pandemic is for sure a long process, the result of which will be dependent upon myriad of factors. The above-mentioned countries that are relatively successful in tackling the pandemic seem to share common features, that they have highly disciplined bureaucracies and society, have been pretty advanced in their adoption of science and technology, and those features are related somehow to their culture in its broadest sense. For most of other countries, the coronavirus pandemic has forced them to rethink about many aspects, particularly about the effectiveness of their bureaucracies and their societies. In addition, for the other countries, the last 1 year has taught them one important lesson, that they have to speed up their adoption and use of technology in governance, businesses, and other daily aspects and activities in order to survive from the debilitating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. My papers discuss, albeit limited, the interrelated features that seems to be playing a part in helping countries or governments to effectively deal with the pandemic. I discuss in general terms lessons learned from the pandemic as to how it has changed the three interrelated features in our respective societies so that we can be better prepared in the future. Now, I focus on two aspects because this pandemic has been multidimensional. That is the use of technology, in particular in education and health sectors, and I will discuss the opportunity and challenges in these two areas. On the opportunity side, Since the early months of the pandemic, the use of technology has been growing very rapidly. As lockdowns and other forms of quarantine mechanisms were implemented to curtail people's movement, the use and adoption of digital platforms skyrocketed, both by governments and citizens across the globe. One of the research that was done by one of my colleagues at CSIS found that there were 20 countries that developed and launched tracking apps for COVID-19 as of May 2020, last year. The research noted that the use of mobile apps for tracking people with COVID-19 can help scientists in collecting massive amount of data so that they will be able to research, reduce the transmission level, contains the virus spread, and eventually come with policy solution at a relatively lower cost. It is interesting to note, though, that countries that suffered from previous contagious diseases such as SARS in the early 2000s were among the first to develop such mobile apps. China was the first to introduce the use of tracking apps called Alipay Health Code that collected relatively detailed information from the users, Chinese citizens. So did South Korea and Taiwan. However, in my opinion, the extensive use of tracking apps might put citizens under a situation in which their privacy and private identity are compromised due to various circumstances. For example, it might be that the apps were developed by third parties, non-government entities that in many cases might transfer data collected from individual citizens for commercial purposes or other purposes without proper consent. Over time, heavily surveillance systems such as the one through the mobile apps by the states may be detrimental for civic life, as it will create an environment conducive for the rise of the so-called proactive state phenomenon. Prior to the pandemic, there have already been many concerns about the possible implication of state actors that has the power to overly regulate, controls, and even punishes unapproved behavior of citizens in the internet sphere that blurred freedom of expression and state authority. So we have to find the right balance between the two in the post-pandemic era. That now in the pandemic time, governments are collecting data of the physical movement of their citizens, might even provide more controlling power to the governments over their citizens. Regardless though, digital platforms are being utilized in many different ways, especially for distant or remote learning as schools were shut down and also in telemedicine. In-person schooling is impossible during the pandemic, as we know, and as a matter of fact, this is not the first time that schools and universities are forced to lock down and disrupted globally. One among many lessons that can be drawn from the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic is that at that time, many countries adopted open air and adaptive schooling. Germany was the first to introduce open air school system for sick students when tuberculosis that spread in that country in early 1900. When the Spanish flu outbreak hit the United States in 1918, it was reported that more than 130 cities adopted open air schooling as well. The open air schoolings adopted during the previous pandemic eventually inspired city planners to preserve and create more green public spaces in order to promote public health, some things that I do hope will inspire many policymakers in Indonesia to create more green spaces, especially in the cities. The presence of digital technology is what separates the COVID-19 pandemic from the previous pandemics. While there has been no sufficient data to prove that the adoption of open-air schooling actually lowered the infection rate during the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, now online learning possibly does, as it allows students and teachers to stay at home and therefore avoiding risk of contracting the virus during their travel time to and from schools. Since the COVID-19 pandemic started, the World Economic Forum reveals that 1.2 billion children have been out of classroom globally. This fact alone for sure has changed education forever, as distant e-learning is now fully at work. It must be noted, though, that even before the pandemic, the level of growth and adoption of education technology had already been high. According to World Economic Forum, the global investment on education technology amounted to approximately 17 billion US dollar in 2019. If anything, COVID-19 certainly accelerated the adoption of education technology in many countries. Another area where the use of technology sprang during the pandemic is the health sector. During the pandemic, people were encouraged to or voluntarily discourage themselves not to come to hospital. Images that show long lines of patients with COVID-19 infection queuing for treatment were displayed in the media and quickly circulated in the social media. Hospitals are probably the truest epicenter of the spread of COVID-19 pandemic. In the US alone, almost 3,000 healthcare workers died because of COVID-19 throughout the year of 2020. Amnesty International, utilizing available data from governments, media, unions, civil society organizations in 70 countries, reported that approximately 17,000 health workers working in the front line had died because of COVID-19. 17,000 health workers. The US, Mexico, Brazil, Russia, and the United Kingdom are among the countries that recorded the highest number of deaths of their health workers. 3,300 in Mexico, 1,100 in Brazil, 1,100 in Russia, and 1,300 in the United Kingdom, according to the data. In this kind of circumstance, technology provides an alternative. Halodoc, for example, one of the most popular digital health care platform in Indonesia, saw a very significant increase in the download rate for the apps. The numbers of downloads for the Halodoc app doubled in 2020, and now it has 18 million active users. I used Halodoc 1 or 2 times already. It is also followed by a significant jump of users who utilize various services available in the app. In addition, in 2020, the number of users who use Halodoc's online medical consultation service jumped 10 times. Meanwhile, Halodoc's online pharmacy service used by customers increased 6 times compared to the previous year in 2019. Halodoc even set up drive-through facilities for testing as well as for vaccine, for which user must register online using the platform. Another popular telehealth app, Halodoc, without H, had 33 million active users by March 2020 and recorded approximately 50% increase in doctor-patient interaction in the platform during the month. These cost-effective and efficient services provided by the tech companies obviously complement the brick-and-mortar same services provided by the government. But tech companies cannot replace them. Certainly, the pandemic highlights the need for a new culture of democratic governance in which public-private partnership might be the organizing norm. On the challenges side, online classroom, however, remains problematic and difficult, especially in developing countries due to a number of reasons. To name a few: lack of devices availability and internet access. More importantly, as you might experience, as well I did, teachers and instructors have yet to acquire skills and knowledge on how to do the online teaching. Online learning also probably disadvantages students who are coming from low-income family background if government intervention is not put in place. There is a risk that if the pandemic that has forced governments to halt school and university continue, inequality might even be widened. At least one research done by a team of researchers at Arizona State University found that students reported that their families saw a decrease in their financial income during the pandemic. The students themselves earn less. and those who graduated in the pandemic year understandably feared that they would find it difficult to find jobs. Many governments, especially in developing countries, face a tough fact that internet access and its infrastructure for their citizens are still in need of so much improvement. Take Indonesia, for example. According to a research conducted by University of Indonesia, 80% of internet users in Indonesia are accessing internet from their mobile devices. In other words, Indonesia is a mobile-first country in which mobile access is important. Yet, Indonesia is a country with serious challenge of digital divide. More than 80% of internet users in Indonesia live in urban areas who have better access to the internet than those who live in rural areas. The Indonesian Bureau of Statistics, or BPS, recorded that out of 82,000 villages in Indonesia, 55,000 receive a strong cellular signal, 18,600 receive weak signal, and 7,700 have no signal at all. Thus, connectivity is another area of concern for Indonesia. One study by the Omidyar Network in 2019 found that on average, connectivity rate in Indonesia is 13.7 megabps per second. The figure is even lower for mobile phone, which is 9.8 megabyte per second. For the benefit of comparison, Australia's average connectivity rate, which is considered the slowest among the OECD countries, is 41.7 megabps. Compare that with ours, 13 megabps. The gap is significant. Furthermore, COVID-19 also exposes our vulnerability in the cyberspace, ranging from the so-called infodemic, which include issues from hoax, misinformations, and disinformation about the pandemic that now influence the receptivity rate of COVID-19 vaccines. Still, according to our research at CSIS survey done in Jakarta and Jogja, actually, about 30% of respondents believe that they don't need vaccine. This is really a challenge. In 2020, the number of malicious websites pretending to provide COVID-19 related information as the clickbait rose. In the time of pandemic, the need for and the search of information about novel coronavirus certainly requires a higher degree of digital literacy, so that it will allow us to develop a critical self-awareness of not only the symbolic nature of our word, but also the processes of personal learning. This is a challenge that needs to be dealt with. On building research culture and capacity to anticipate new global change. One interesting fact that needs to be pointed out regarding the handling of the pandemic is that China, South Korea, and Taiwan, and to a lesser extent Singapore and Japan, are considered relatively successful. They are all East Asian countries, or in the case of Singapore, share the same East Asian Confucian values. One strategic thinker, Tarakana, went as far as stating, if there is a political system that has emerged victorious from the coronavirus pandemic, it is Asian democratic technocracy. China's resilience has put paid to the notion that China's Mandarins are merely East Asian versions of Soviet apparatchiks. But more significantly, Asia's gold standard democracies such as Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan have proven to be global role models for their blend of competence and transparency. These countries share another common important feature, that they are all big spenders in research and development. Research and scientific culture are reflected in their budget allocation for research and development. UNESCO recent data shows that in terms of their relative proportion to the GDP, South Korea ranked first globally in their research and development budget, amounted to 4% of their GDP. Japan ranked second with 3.5%. Singapore ranked 14 with 2.1%. of their GDP allocated for research and development. In the purchasing power parity term, China ranked second after the US, as China spends 346 billion US dollars annually for research. It has also to be noted that one thing that the top 15 countries in the world in R&D have one thing in common is that their business sectors are also big spenders in research and development. Now, I think that is need to be think about in Indonesia and in other developing countries. While the so-called traditional security challenges, to borrow a term from the study of international relations, such as interstate conflict and war remain around the corner, the world is now certainly facing common global problems with devastating impacts, such as the pandemic that we are currently fighting, climate change, and also more frequent natural disasters in many places on the map. These non-traditional challenges require technocratic solutions that more often than not need to be based on science. For that to happen, research tradition and scientific culture must be maintained and developed. The East Asian countries mentioned earlier are seemingly investing in the right way to be better prepared to face future pandemic or other catastrophic events by spending significantly on science, research, and development. The following figures are particularly instructive. South Korea has 6,826 researchers per million inhabitants. Japan has 5,328 researchers per 1 million inhabitants. China has 1,089. Singapore has 6,600. Meanwhile, my fellow Indonesians, on the screen, Indonesia only spent 0.1% of our GDP annually and has only 89 researchers per million inhabitants. This needs to be changed for sure. Now, some takes away by way of conclusion of my remarks. The pandemic has exposed our vulnerabilities and forced us to think various aspects of life. There are lessons that can be drawn from countries that are considered relatively successful in tackling the pandemic. First, it is not the form of government that is important, but the degree of governance. Second, higher level of technology development today is what separates us from the previous pandemic, especially the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. COVID-19 accelerated our digital transformation, which presents opportunity and challenges, given the fact that for many countries, especially the developing ones, there are issues to be resolved first. Third, new global challenges, such as the current coronavirus pandemic, require technocratic solutions that can be provided by science. Therefore, scientific culture, research tradition, and innovation must be strengthened. It cannot be done solely by the governments. Non-government actors such as businesses, universities, think tanks, and other civil society organizations need to be engaged. Therefore, above all, new culture of governance is imperative. An ecosystem of policy that is participatory in nature and places importance of science is very much needed so that all stakeholders can contribute in building evidence-based preparedness for any future pandemic or disasters. Thank you for your kind attention. I return the screen to our moderator, Dr. Zainul Abidin Bagir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Phillips. We still have time, about almost 20 minutes. So if there's questions, you can post it through our chat, and then I can read it. While waiting for the questions, I'd like to summarize a few points and probably ask also a question. So one of the points which you mentioned, Phillips, which I think is very interesting, is that what explains the effectiveness in dealing with the pandemic is not the type of government, certain types of democracy or others, but degrees of governance. So, but on the other hand, the advance of surveillance technology, it threatens the privacy of citizens. It may also threaten democracy. Even democratic countries now we see have faced resistance by their citizens who think that the state has gone too far in imposing restrictions to freedom of movements, in some cases even freedom of speech, freedom of religion, etc. So in terms of the relation between democracy and the pandemic, one other question, probably a slightly different question, probably is how resilient is democracy in the face of pressures coming from waste in managing the pandemic? Can they resist well, probably some of it has to do with the temptation to exert excessive authorities and others. If you, while we're waiting for other questions, if you want to respond to that, Pak Phillips, please.
Thank you, Pak Zainal Abidin Bakir. That is certainly a question that everybody is grappling with. But my thinking is this, that dealing with the pandemic, time is of crucial importance, because governments have to act quickly. And this is where some kind of autocratic form of government have some edge, because they can move quickly without much deliberation, and then they can resolve the problem in a timely manner. But talking about democracies and non-democracies, democracies guarantee a regular change of government, a more transparent government in a way that will not be happening in the autocratic government. So non-democracies rely on luck. If they have so-called benign rulers, then they might have some lucks that these benign rulers would think about the protection of their citizens. But in many cases, as we know, what we have in non-democratic society is that they're going to have corrupt government, and the government that would not want to lose power. So they would use any other means to stay in power. And China would be one exception in this, because the survival of the regime is dependent upon the success of tackling the pandemic. So that's why I think the Chinese government in this regard moved very, very quickly and rightly. But the other autocratic countries, I think, failed to take care of their citizens during the pandemic. But on the other hand, as I mentioned in the presentation, the U.S., the established democracy during the infection phase of the coronavirus failed to act swiftly, because it is complicated by the situation, domestic situation. Election is coming, and at the same time, I'm sorry to my friend Jim Hostry from Emory University. I saw you on screen. The previous government certainly have no interest in tackling the pandemic seriously, but the US, I think, is lucky, because now they have a new government that act quite swiftly in terms of vaccination. US is now probably one of the fastest country in doing the vaccination. That, I think, again, showed the importance of the level of governance, not the form of government, that will decide the success or the failure of countries in dealing with the pandemic. The second part of your question is about the surveillance. This is also the consequence of having a very interconnected world. If the government did not collecting our private data, tech companies do every day. We voluntarily give up our private data to tech companies on a day-to-day basis, to Facebook, to Google, and to others, Instagram, and so on, without us knowing. Then this is the situation that the citizens across the globe are facing, that they have to face state power and also business power. So I think now what we have to do is how to democratize and to democratize data and to protect identity. In the context of Indonesia and some other countries, privacy protection and data protection regulations are non-existent. So, but in some other countries, that kind of regulation exists in Europe, in some other places. That's why I think in terms of what we can do is to create some sort of transparent regulations on data protection and privacy protection, especially in terms of law and in terms of fair use of data, big data collected by these tech companies as well as by the government.
Yeah, thank you, Phillips. I saw two questions from our South Asian colleagues. First from Professor Hamidullah. Has there been any cooperation among Asian countries to fight COVID pandemic? And then from Mutahara Deva, which I think is from Kashmir. Pandemic has exposed the lack of research and knowledge in Asian countries. Please elucidate what steps Indonesia has taken to tackle this issue. What has been done in your country to address, and this is a different, the third question, what has been done in your country to address inadequacy faced during pandemic for women?
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Professor Marazi. In Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia, we have a regional organization. As I understand, South Asian countries have also a certain type of regional organization. In Southeast Asia, there is ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And under the framework of ASEAN, there are collaborations in terms of tackling the pandemic, not only with not only among ASEAN member states, but also ASEAN as a regional organization with its dialogue partners that includes major powers: United States, China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and others. So there is this framework under the so-called ASEAN Social Security Community Pillar, in which public health has actually been one of the main focus for ASEAN even before the pandemic. So there has been ASEAN health minister meetings since the past few years, and also at the director general levels of health ministries across Southeast Asia, together with the dialogue partners that I mentioned earlier. And secondly, in terms of vaccines, not only Asia, there is this consortium, Gavi, CEPI, of to ensure equal access for developing countries for vaccines, of which Indonesia is part of, and many Asian countries are also part of this network of countries doing vaccine diplomacy to make sure that we have equal access to vaccines. And thirdly, in terms of bilateral cooperations, some ASEAN countries, in particular Indonesia, has collaboration and cooperation with vaccine manufacturer. In the case of Indonesia, Indonesia has a cooperation with one of the vaccine manufacturers from China, as you might know, Sinovac, in which Indonesia has been a partner from the test phase level of the vaccine development, and eventually will be in the production of vaccines, and through the transfer of technology, so that Indonesia might be able to provide vaccines from other countries, for other countries, once it is done. And the second question, pandemic has exposed the lack of research and knowledge in Asian countries. Now, there is another interesting fact that I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, that some of East Asian countries have been smartly learned from their experience from the previous pandemic, SARS, especially in early 2000. Singapore, South Korea, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan at that time, they were kind of devastated because of the vaccine. In early 2000, they learned that their health system was vulnerable. Ratio of bed per thousands of people needs to be improved and so on. So they did their homework since 2000. China, for example, they have this lab to study virology in Wuhan, as we know. They studied SARS. When SARS disappeared, they did not stop the research. They continue researching coronavirus. So it seems to me that contributes a lot to their quick understanding so that they can develop a vaccine quite quickly. Now, we are lucky or unlucky that we did not suffer from SARS. So we did not have the experience and we did not have the shock. And I think the point that I have been trying to make is that Indonesia in particular, and some of the countries in Southeast Asia and Asia, we are actually prone to disaster. We experience a lot from so many disasters: flood, earthquake, tsunamis, and other forms of disasters. But it seems that we fail to learn and prepare ourselves better for future pandemic. For future disasters. I think COVID-19 is really a wake-up call for Indonesia and many countries in many developing countries, that we really need to invest for preparedness, not investing when disasters already strike, and that requires research. If you are interested in finding which countries spend what amount of budget for research and development, UNESCO, from UNESCO website, you will find data from all countries and how they spend and for research and development. And it's a very interesting website, and then they did this report, I think annually, and so we can figure out which country, and especially I think Asian countries are lacking the investment on research and development. On the women issues, I think there are some studies that came out, but I'm not an expert on this. But there has been an increase in the issue of domestic violence, for example, during the pandemic, because people are staying at home, and women are particularly vulnerable of domestic violence. And this is not only the case of Indonesia, but I think across the globe, the same numbers of incident increase. And that something that is not being adequately dealt with. In terms of working at home, I think that has been studied that now that we are working at home mostly, I came across with the study, but I could not recall. I'm sorry, but women is relatively disadvantaged, of the working from home policies, because somehow because of the patriarchy and so on, women have to do still some domestic works, while their male partners or husband and so on could just sit and do Zoom and so on without taking care of this household thing, because of the patriarchal views of domestic relations. But this is also something that has not been adequately dealt with. In terms of economic assistance and so on. In Indonesia, I think the government subsidies goes to household, and so I do not really know the distribution for male and female, but government subsidies, social protection packages go to the recipients with the by name and by address, and of course the one that is registered at the government data is the head of the household. It can be female or male. I don't really have data to adequately address the question.
Just to let you, the audience, knows some of the topics we discussed this morning will be taken up again in a few panels, including some plenary sessions. For example, the third plenary session will take up the issue of technology and technocracy after COVID-19. And yeah, a few other topics related to governance, to democracy, and others. We don't have much time left. We have 3 minutes left, and I didn't see more questions in the chat. So, Phillips, if you have closing statements you want to make before we close this first session, please. You have 2-3 minutes. Yeah, please.
I think I will only say thank you, and I am humbled to be invited as to deliver a keynote speaker. I hope I set the tones for the discussion in the breakout sessions, and so that we could understand more the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemics for so many aspects of our life. Because as we know, this is multidimensional crisis. It is health problem, it's communication problem, it is governance problem, it is science problem, and then it is probably our cultural problem as well, as we are grappling with the pandemic in the past 12 months. I wish all of us a very good conference, and I hope I can join you in all the sessions this year, and hopefully next year we will be talking about lesson learned from the pandemic, as we are already moving forward with a more healthy situation. Please stay healthy, and see you on screen. Thank you, Pak Zainal Bakir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Phillips. I think we agree that you indeed has set the tone for the coming discussions. There'll be, I think, probably around 100 papers that will be discussed in the coming sessions. And I think we're off to a good start this morning with the keynote speak. Thank you very much. And please, if the audience want to give an applause either by emoji or other ways. So we will close this session this morning, and I return the floor to Ida. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Philip.
Thank you, Pak Zainal.
Thank you very much to Dr. Philip Pramonte, Executive Director, Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, and Dr. Zainal Abidin Bagir from IRS and ICRS. Distinguished guests, speakers, paper presenters, and participants, please kindly fill the Google form that we share in the chat box to indicate your attendance. Thank you. And we now come to the end of this opening ceremony. But before we really end it, we can take a photograph. So we would like to request to all of you to activate your camera, your video camera on your devices, and please show to us your beautiful and handsome face. For the audience here, Pak Diki, Bu Hilda, and Pak Habib, and also the committee, please come to the stage and take a photograph here. Please show us your beautiful smiles. Okay, please hold the smile.
Adiknya agak gerak. Ya, ada jaraknya. Bu Ida agak ke kanan sedikit, Bu. J. Ya.
One, two, three. Okay. The next one, one, two, three. Okay. Next. One, two, three.
Yes, once more.
Okay. One, two, three. Okay, and thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And on behalf of the organized committee, we would like to extend once again our deep appreciation for your support and participation. We wish you enjoying the productive and fruitful discussions during the sessions in this conference, International Graduate Students and Scholars Conference in Indonesia. Now we can have a moment of break at your place. Then we will gather again in the Zoom to join the plenary session 1 at 9:45 Western Indonesian time. And to all of you, you can get the Zoom link for all sessions through your Google Drive that sent to you by the committee, or access the ugm.id/IGSSCI 2021. Thank you and
Thank you very much.
Teman-teman, ini ada usulan di mana kalau kita bisa jadi kita tidak perlu ke lantai 2. Gimana?
Ya, saya kira sampai
Kalau saya menjadi moderator di sini, bisa mengambilkan isu seperti saya bisa. Berarti saya nggak perlu juga.
Silakan.
Okay, thank you very much for all of the distinguished guests, speakers, and participants to participate in this international conference. And now we will enter the first plenary session of Hardware, Culture, and Ecological Crisis. We will have 3 speakers in this session. The first one is Maharani Hapsari, PhD, from University of Gajah Mada. She talks about ecological crisis and the politics of transformative knowledge. The second is the Associate Professor Zida Muhammad from University of Malaya about place-based citizen science as a hardware approach for participatory watershed management. And the third is Fahrudin Majari Mangunjaya, PhD, from Universitas Nasional, and he talks about culture and nature, protection of natural areas for sustainable use of natural resources. And there has been a little change for our program. For this plenary session, our chair will be the co-doctor faculty of ICRS and steering committee of this international conference, Bapak Diki Sofyan. And I will give the place and time for you. Please, Pak Diki.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm happy to chair the first plenary session of the International Graduate Students and Scholars Conference today. With us, we have 3 great scholars. All 3 of them are my very good friends. As I recall, all of the 3 speakers are experts on religion and ecological issues relating to the hardware, spirituality, Islam, and also politics, all combined. So I would like to first give the time to Dr. Hapsari for her paper entitled Ecological Crisis and the Politics of Transformative Knowledge. Dr. Hapsari.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iggsci Sofyan, distinguished speakers and also participants of this conference. Thank you very much for giving me time to speak in this first plenary session. I'm going to discuss, how much time do I have, Dr. Iggsci?
15 to 20 minutes.
I see, okay. So in my presentation, I will elaborate the relationship between science and politics by reflecting from how scholars in the field of sustainability science develop the self-criticism on how the scientific endeavors are politically meaningful, and what does it mean to us when we are dealing with the very multidimensional aspects of the ecological crisis. Unprecedented ecological crisis brings important questions on the political implications of industrial knowledge production. And such questions have been responded by the emergence of sustainability science as transformative knowledge project. This knowledge project aspires a critical position on the limits of the hegemonic knowledge in addressing the very root causes of ecological problems. Within the realm of sustainability science, there is a potential to discuss further how transformative knowledge project may contribute to structural transformation that considers the limits of anthropocentric industrial knowledge. Sustainability science has developed as a very important field of discipline that has unique approach in terms of how it engages various ways of knowing that includes natural science, humanities, and social science. The notion of common future, our common future as appear in the Brundtland Report, deserves a continuous reflection in the context of how this knowledge project transform our ideological position and shape our ecological consciousness as planetary citizens, how it helps us to redefine our sense of belonging, and how can we stand as part of the common humanity to address the intra and intergenerational and interspecies justice. Global responses to ecological crises are fragmented. Skeptic imaginaries presented the bleak picture of human civilization at the age of catastrophes. The other imaginaries, meanwhile, see the world through the lens of scientific optimism, arguing humans are capable of resilient adaptability to even the most severe planetary dangers. Despite the skeptics and optimists debate, we all recognize that ecological questions such as climate change, the needs to transition in the energy sector, food security, pandemics and diseases, deforestation, plastic pollution are pertinent to the future well-being of all. It also has deep implications to the interspecies and intergenerational spheres of planetary living. So the question to ask is, how can current knowledge production practices in sustainability science help us to reflect upon and to drive our emancipation from ecological crisis in our engagement with scientific endeavor? Political response to ecological crisis range from moderate to radical, and the future trajectory of scientific endeavor needs to negotiate with the political dimensions of knowledge pursued by sustainability science in reorganizing knowledge production as a process that is ideologically contested. The deep connection between science and ideology is discussed here as an attempt to interrogate the depoliticization of science, which in many ways is still considered neutral from the possibility of power intervention. I focus my analysis on how current sustainability science literatures engage explicitly with political critique of knowledge production as intellectual hegemonic project. Sustainability science is mostly associated with the global agenda of sustainable development promoted by the United Nations and other prominent international institutions, including international development aid organizations. It is therefore often termed interchangeably with the science for sustainable development. Since the introduction of its formal definition in the Brundtland Report and its global reassertion at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, if you may recall, in 1992, the term sustainability has developed as a highly politicized intellectual agenda. A study documented 20,000 papers, authored by 37,000 authors in 174 countries and 2,200 cities, emphasized the focus of sustainability science on the management of human, social, and ecological systems. I further examine how selected literatures within this scope raise reflective discussions on the politicization of knowledge production within the sustainability science in the interplay of the existing knowledge and its search for alternative knowledge order. In doing so, I engage with Antonio Gramsci's critiques on hegemony in understanding how knowledge production operates in its historical ideological context. In Gramscian terms, knowledge has both coercive and consensual power dimension. The concept of hegemony that I will discuss here is hopefully can endorse us to look at the leadership aspects of hegemony rather than its coercive aspects, because we need to look at the possibilities of engaging with the very plural epistemologies and the very plural positions when we talk about intellectual contributions and scientific endeavors. And this is concerned with not only criticizing the existing knowledge, but also to present an alternative that is structurally feasible given the issues of power inequality and power imbalances. In a hegemonic project, intellectuals are the social forces whose role in a political struggle is crucial. The production of ecological crisis through scientific knowledge is an arena of political struggle. If I may relate to Michael Ecker's and Alex Lovegood's statement, the production of nature in the form and in the way we understand ecological crisis is also a form of appropriation of reality through scientific way of knowing. There are some limitations in the way we keep some aspects of the unknown untouchable. The emergence of counter-hegemonic scientific agenda involves the roles of intellectual leadership. And we are yet to find what is the most useful form of intellectual leadership that we can develop. But we believe that we have a strong modality in terms of our achievements in scientific projects. If I may refer to Robert Koch's two orientation of theories, one is problem-solving theories, which are oriented towards maintaining status quo, and critical theories, which aim at changing the status quo. How can we place sustainability science in between these two categories? The making of hegemonic order in the form of common sense in Gramscian term is a crucial political project. And it shapes the relations between the ruler and the ruled, or to project in the context of this paper between the knowers and the known, between the experts and the non-experts, who are often distanced by their intellectual functions in the political settings. As part of the counter-hegemonic project, the strategies that intellectuals are pursuing an alternative scientific endeavor are seen from the viewpoint of building broad-based intellectual consensus rather than the employment of coercive political means. And we need to also look at the aspects of political resistance in terms of how explicit intellectual critics are posed on the dominant knowledge formation. And the second part of my discussion touch upon how this sustainability science problematizing some problems within the industrial knowledge production. My study found that the interplay of accumulated domination and resistance are essential in the formation of knowledge on ecological crisis. Sustainability science literatures engage with the problems facing these limitations in three respects. The first one is related to the material and ideological dimensions of hegemonic knowledge. The material basis of crisis are associated with the extractive nature of socio-economic structures driven by infinite economic growth, which often externalizes ecological consequences in the production system. That's why any efforts to change the reliance on growth is politically costly, as it will threaten the socio-economic instabilities associated with the established order. This has also made the coercive aspects of knowledge discernible. The concentration of wealth in the North has also been a political economic context in which the ecological crisis must be seen in terms of its distributive consequences. The association of sustainability critics with growth-oriented approaches mixed with technological advancement has continuously appeared in sustainability science debate. Literatures also relate to the discussion of ideological basis of capitalist production, to mention the role of free market consumerism, which intertwines with the infinite accumulation. Critics to hegemonic knowledge pointed out the resilient aspect of ecological crisis supported by the knowledge block that can be complicit to power relations. And the second one is the question on the power imbalances in the structure of global knowledge production. Sustainability science literatures recognize the persistent power disparity between the global North and the global South. In the global North, the engagement of sustainability science with ecological modernization indicates the primacy of technological progress that facilitates the transition from business as usual scenario to a non-linear model that includes dematerialization and resource efficiency at various levels of industrial modes of production. The idea of sustainability, while technically promising in the North, is often perceived skeptically from the viewpoint of the global South. This is amid scientific claims that societies in the global South is already and is projected to experience the most severe consequences of the linear economic growth logic. So the search of sustainable path deserves recognition of the very diverse avenues in which scientists are negotiating their scientific claim. I'm sorry, can you hear my voice?
Yeah, clear.
Okay, thank you. I will continue my presentation. Growth-oriented development and massive resource extraction in the South involves the issue of poverty and lack of capacity. Sustainability scientists claim to provide an explicit normativity in conducting their scientific program, although there needs to be more clarification on the theories of it. The challenge for sustainability science is to bridge the North-South inequality in the scientific agenda. A study by Baptista highlighted how much on sustainability practices is problematic when there are political confrontation. Knowledge representation of the globe. We can look at the extent of academic publication representing the global South. We can also look at the flow of resource redistribution at the global level. But we have to also look at the possible collaboration that already emerged with global North and global South. And there are also problems when sustainability science projects as an abstract to universal experience of the global North, while failing to appreciate the particular socio-cultural dimensions of ecological crisis from the global South perspective. And the third aspect of the critics on industrial knowledge production is the question of political binaries in scientific authorities. There are three critical reflections at this point. The first one is that some past leaders challenge the worldview of human domination over the earth. It is also related to how the anthropocentric power pattern and nature exploitation is maintained through technological knowledge and its consequences. The second aspect is the inside-outside border of scientific discipline. Sustainability science promotes a multidisciplinary approach to bridge societal practice with scientific practice in knowledge production, as opposed to the monodisciplinary approach. The third aspect, theories and practitioners' binary. The claims that sustainability engineering needs to be a neutral sphere from any ideological intervention can no more hold it in a society where everyday encountered challenges are so confronting. Science and policy-making process in the field of sustainability have intimate connections, as appeared in the adoption of problem-solving approaches by medical authorities. And having known the problematization of the unsustainability, I move to how sustainability science researchers envision the politicization of transformative knowledge. There are some notes from existing literatures. The first one is on the epistemic dialogues, to what extent we can open up the broader spaces for debate. Previous studies have associated the term transformative knowledge with specific ways of knowing beyond the engineering endeavor. Spangenberg, for example, provided an overview of how the struggle for social hegemony involves various social groups in various countries with diverse degrees of engagement in defining the concept of sustainability. It is not only a matter of individual judgment of scientists, but also how to situate the epistemological process as a form of collective will that represent the very diverse realms of sustainability decisions. A recent study by Asokan and friends used the term amalgamation of old and new approaches of data collection and interpretation in sustainability science literature. This study recognized that subjective aspects of data-intensive approach is concerned with a very diverse audience, geographical areas, and issue focus associated with diverse sets of socio-technological values. For example, limits to growth, triple bottom approach, transparency, accountability, and smart governance. The search of sustainable path deserves recognition of the very diverse avenues in which scientists are negotiating their scientific claims. For example, in the transition towards bioeconomy, Clark and friends argued that the components of transformative knowledge must include communication, participation, and decision-making skills. Epson argued that due to the barriers to address sustainability at its roots, there is need to foster a new approach that considers the role of individuals, people's connection to nature, and their influence on sustainability outcomes, and knowledge production and use in transformational processes. We are also seeing at the level of the intellectual and individual, they are very much divided individuals. There are many aspects of identity formation which we need to reflect upon. The production of transformative knowledge is taking place at the arena of hybridity. We often see that the boundaries between the powerful and the powerless are becoming much more distorted. The role of intellectuals as observers is more adequate in developing a broad-based scientific leadership. How intellectuals can be much more empathetic to the situation that they are observing. Ernst and friends use the term a mediator, refer to ambiguous space in which intellectuals are in the situation of divided identity when dealing with science practice interface. In a quite simple tone, Lilly and Norgard argue that natural scientists are limited to develop a value for judgment on their efforts in defining sustainability. They question the direction of science, self, and society. The fixation of science as an attribute of privilege is being challenged by the pressure to respond to the very actual and real-time human vulnerabilities. The open interpretation of sustainability has created both mobilization of knowledge and significant process. And lastly, on politicizing transformative knowledge, how can we transcend the core and peripheral science divide? Scientific determination, which separates the scientific world with the non-scientific world, produces some limits, situating so-called indigenous knowledge and local values in the larger system of sustainable science is an issue that requires stronger philosophical approach. Indigenous knowledge is seen as a way of knowing that remains part of the scientific realms. Hill and friends use the term co-production between scientific and indigenous knowledge. This position still agree with the very different intrinsic qualities of science and indigenous knowledge, yet aims at offering a reconciliatory position by envisioning more egalitarian standing between the two. The question of knowledge representation are prominent with the possibility of power intervention. How to connect the whole parts of the knowledge puzzles requires the recognition of the plural epistemological positions. It also demands political deliberation to open up for new possibilities transcending the rigid boundaries of scientific enterprises. When transdisciplinary awareness is treated as remedial to problem-solving activity, it would neither contribute to the transformational agenda of sustainability science. So beyond the democratization promises, a deeper structural transformation is worth pursuing if sustainability science is to be envisioned as counter-hegemonic project. The ideological aspect of knowledge, to conclude, is not something that we can always conceal, as the excess of power imbalances often emerge in various forms of social crisis. And it also exacerbated the negative ecological repercussions, which eventually leads to deepen our vulnerabilities. The movement towards transformative knowledge can be distorted by lack of self-questioning on the functioning ideology that drive our scientific assumptions. When deeply scrutinized, science is only one mode of knowing, not the only way. The knowledge on ecological crisis that we produce came from a very diverse interpretation of human relations to nature. Making knowledge production and necessarily lead to structural change and counter-hegemonic project when there is continuous moderation on the very root causes of ecological crisis. There is a need for deliberation to open debate, to criticize the limits of the existing knowledge or in conditioning the systemic and structural changes. I think I will stop here and I will give the screen back to Dr. Iggsci. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Habsari. I would like now to turn the attention to Associate Professor Zida Mohammed from University Malaya. She will be talking about place-based citizen science as a hardware approach for participatory watershed management. Zida?
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Pak Iggsci. Can you hear me clearly? Yes? Okay, great. Assalamualaikum and greetings of peace to everyone. I'm very happy to be a part of this conference. I can hear some echo here. Is it fine?
We don't hear any echo.
No, you don't. Okay, great. Thank you to the MC and also Pak Iggsci for the kind introduction. I am Zida from the Department of Science and Technology Studies, Faculty of Science, University of Malaya, Malaysia. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer, especially Professor Siti Maklana, the Dean of the Graduate School of University of Gajah Mada, and also Pak Iggsci himself as the head of the conference committee for inviting me to be a part of this panel today. I'm also blessed to join Dr. Maharani Hapsa and also Dr. Fakhruddin, which is also I know very well, in this panel on hardware, culture, and ecological crisis. Is it okay if I show my presentation slides? Can you? Okay. Can you see my slides now?
Perfect.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, right. So the title of my presentation is Place-Based Citizen Science as a Hardware Approach for Participatory Watershed Management. But before I start, I just would like to acknowledge my research team on this topic, Dr. Sarah McBride, Afan, Madam Asya, and Mr. Masbudi, who has been working with me in this area. I will proceed now. So the outline of the presentation is, first I will provide you with a background of the hardware research for watershed management, mainly the work that has been done by University of Malaya, which I hope is in line with the theme of this conference on culture, technology, and social transformation. And I think I've talked to Pak Iggsci before about the hardware approach, and probably he felt that it has some relevance to what we are discussing today. And also I think it has relevance as well, the discussion by Dr. Maharani just now on the area of knowledge production and politics of sustainability science. Then I will focus the presentation into the current research and what we're doing on place-based citizen science, which is the latest evolution of our hardware research at present. And finally, I will, if we have time, I will conclude with some insights on how our work is connected to the spirit of the conference on culture, technology, and social transformation in the quest for human dignity. First, some background on our hardware research. Basically, for researchers in the University of Malaya, started our research hardware when we were a part of a 5-year Japan-Malaysia University Research Consortium on Asian-based integrated watershed management way back in 2010. Now, this consortium was co-led by University of Malaya from Malaysia and Kyoto University for Japan, with several universities from both countries acting as consortium members. So it's a quite interesting experimentation at that time. The theme of this program was indeed quite unique. It was called Asian-Oriented Integrated Watershed Management, and the program itself designed to be very uniquely interdisciplinary between the field of natural and technical sciences, social sciences, and the humanities. It was divided into 4 core research areas: hydrology, water quality, risk assessment, and the very cross-cutting area of governance, where the search for the so-called Asian values was considered very crucial. So I was a part of the governance group of the program. Now, the Japanese coordinator for the governance group was Professor Masahisa Nakamura from Shiga University, Japan, while the coordinator for the Malaysian side was Professor Azizah Baharudin from University of Malaya. But also at the same time, she was seconded as the director of the Institute of Islamic Understanding of Malaysia. So this is a very interesting combination of intellectual leadership in sustainability science research. Prof. Nakamura was a civil engineer and a policy practitioner and activist in watershed management, both at the global and in Japan, while Professor Azizah is a science philosopher and a public intellectual in the area of religious environment ethics and sustainable development, also both are known both globally and in Malaysia as well. So it has been quite a privilege for us to work with these two, two intellectual, how do you call it, leaders, and may I say quite eclectic experience working with them. We were talking about knowledge hegemony just now by Dr. Maharani, and how they are trying to deal with that in their capacity when looking at, this exchange of knowledge between Japan, Malaysia, and also using their knowledge in Western knowledge perspective of sustainable development as well. Now, the objective of the governance group of the consortium were two-pronged. One was to collect diverse knowledge data for integrated watershed management and governance structure analysis, and 2, to suggest an Asian-oriented watershed governance. This was based on the appreciation of the consortium members that sustainable watershed management strategies can be unique in different countries and regions due to the differences in geographical, socioeconomic, socio-ecological, and cultural contexts. And there was an assumption that there might be similarities between countries in Asia, starting with Japan and Malaysia. So we were trying to explore that, where we can create Asian-oriented watershed governance. So that was the assumption at the time. Of course, we're still exploring whether that is, whether that is the case. And this is probably, sort of touch upon what Dr. Phillips mentioned earlier in his talk about, the Asian democratic culture. I was interested when, when he was talking about that and how it relates to kind of what that we are doing, and also in what Dr. Maharani mentioned about the politics of sustainability science. One of the core ideas that was developed by this group was the hardware approach. The idea came about from the sharing of experiences by scholars, practitioners in watershed management of Lake Biwa, Japan. We learned a lot from the people there, where it was shown that hardware approach, their hardware as in the advanced scientific and technological knowledge, and having the right software approach in terms of the much needed institutions, policies, regulation, financial support, would not be sustainable if it is not rooted with a strong hardware approach. Hardware is in H-E-A-R-T, yeah? And hardware was eventually defined by the governance group of the consortium as an organic and voluntary approach driven by internal motivation based on shared local values. So theoretically, we also felt that this can be a significant approach as well in the context of Asia. In addition to the practitioners in Lake Biwa saying that it's important, we also find that theoretically it also makes sense because cultural heritage and collective local values plays a very significant role in influencing motivation and social action in this region. And more specifically, in terms of faith-driven actions, Asian communities somehow have a relative openness in using spirituality and religion to steer collective action compared to the West. For instance, I was trained in the Western academic system, and I know it's quite difficult to talk about religion in that context. In particular, what we have learned from the experience of Lake Biwa, the role of hardware approach in watershed management are in 3 areas. One was the use of intergenerational re-enchantment of historical and traditional values to enhance connection and sense of stewardship to the lake. 2, reflective multi-level science policy interface in the governance of the lake, especially in the sense where local community groups in Lake Biwa play a very proactive role with decision makers and other stakeholders to conserve the lake. And 3, the application of deep place-based knowledge and citizen science to improve decision making in lake management. So So based on this learning from Lake Biwa and its conceptual articulation by the consortium, researchers from the University of Malaya decided to experiment with the hardware approach in the Malaysian watershed management context, specifically at two river watersheds in Malaysia, the Selangor River Watershed and Klang River Watershed. Why these two watersheds? Basically because we felt that our first experiment had to have significant meaning to the University of Malaya researchers and campus community. Indeed, sense of belonging is very important because that was exactly what the Lake Biwa experience has taught us. And I remember when I was in Japan, some Japanese colleagues mentioned that the Lake Biwa watershed community, and these are mostly those located at the Shiga prefecture, are quite unique in terms of their knowledge and appreciation of the lake. Not only in terms of ecological knowledge, but also cultural knowledge. Even people in Kyoto, being the cultural center of Japan, the supply from Lake Biwa apparently does not have that kind of close relationship with the lake compared to those with Shiga. So that was very an important lesson that we have learned. So why is the watershed significant to University of Malaya campus community? University of Malaya is located at the heart of the capital city of Kuala Lumpur. If you have been to our university, if you have not, please come. And therefore, a part of the watershed community of the Klang River, which is the main watershed of the capital city. But also at the same time, we are also connected with the Selangor River watershed. Although this watershed is located in the more suburban and rural area, at the neighboring state of Selangor, is quite a distance from the campus, we nevertheless obtain 100% of our water supply from this watershed. So therefore, knowing our connection to the watershed from a hardware perspective is important, as it provides a good entryway to build a stronger place meaning and relationship with our water bodies. Pak Diki, please let me know if I'm 5 minutes before I end, yeah, so I can time myself. And also the academics in the group had a wake-up call as well when our young research assistants actually asked this quite challenging, value-laden question after we returned from Japan and after attending different international and national level meetings on watershed management. One day, as we were walking along the campus, he said, how can we talk about integrated watershed management at the national and international level if we are not even addressing the problem in our own backyard? So this is how the water body in our campus looked like. At the time, I must say the condition of our campus lake and the surrounding river was quite dire, with loads of rubbish. This picture was taken in 2013, and even at the area of the watershed community in Selangor River, where we were doing our academic social research, at the time we were also heavily polluted, especially with plastic debris. Once we even found a washing machine floating on the river. So what happened was that the academic researchers in the team, myself included, decided to support our young, inspiring research assistants to begin a campus sustainability movement, and now a living lab on water management called Water Warriors, to look into water issues in the campus at the Klang River Watershed. We also collaborated with a local group at the downstream area of Selangor River to set up Inspirasi Kawa, a youth club that tries to create awareness through ecotourism on the importance of watershed management. It was in 2013, and since then we have grown by leaps and bounds through our action research activities on these two watershed areas. So finally, alhamdulillah, by combining the hardware and software with the hardware approach, we managed to turn things around after 2 years and brought back the campus lake and river networks to life. This was one of the examples of the paper cutting from a mainstream national newspaper reporting the results of our activism and the work that we have done to revive the water bodies on campus. And in the Selangor River watershed, we also seeing growing stewardship by the local communities in watershed conservation, how this has impacted their role as the stakeholders in taking a much more bottom-up initiative to solve the problem. The village youth has played a significant role in creating awareness about their watershed, and they're increasingly being called to represent local communities in the policy fora for the conservation of their watershed. So within this activism, as researchers, we also took the opportunity to deepen conceptual and theoretical understanding on the hardware approach through action research, which is a research methodology that seeks transformative change through the simultaneous process of taking action and doing research at the same time. And these two processes are linked together by critical reflection. So I was really interested in the presentation by Dr. Maharani just now, how do we deal with this, politics of knowledge and sustainability science? And this is one of the approaches that we are using via action research. In our action research, we're particularly interested to see how how hardware can be implemented in the specific context of watershed management in Malaysia, especially its dynamic interaction with the hardware and software approach. We like to talk about culture, but what is more challenging is how do we connect it to the real process of, hardware, talking to technologists and scientists, and also, with the policymakers in terms of software. Theoretically, it sounds nice, but how pragmatic would it be in the real world? So since 2013, we have been refining our conceptual, theoretical, empirical, and methodological perspective on hardware. And if you're interested, you can read our journal articles, the book that we've written, and also a book chapter shown on the slide if you're interested. So now I would like to proceed with the place-based citizen science, which is the latest evolution of our hardware work at present. So in 2018, we were lucky to meet Dr. Sarah McBride, steward and researcher for Sustainability Places Research Institute, Cardiff University in Wales, UK. After some exchange, we realized that there are exciting synergies between the hardware approach and the place-based method, which they were specializing in. Subsequently, we were lucky to obtain a grant for Academy Science Malaysia to explore this further in the context of applying this synergy in the context of citizen science. One of the hardware tools that we observe have been successfully implemented in Lake Biwa. Now, there are several reasons of why we choose citizen science as the next step forward in our hardware work. One, we saw real potential of this approach when we were in Japan. Also realized that the citizen science approach to Lake Biwa were different compared to the more mainstream citizen science that are more popular in the advanced countries in the West, especially in the UK, US, Australia, and Europe. There was something unique and very place-based about the citizen science movement in Lake Biwa. We later emulated it in Malaysia, but we wanted to understand how this approach can be improved from a more global perspective. Because before this, it was just an exchange between Malaysia and Japan. But how do we actually see this approach from a much more global context? Two, we see that there is a potential of citizen science being a novel approach for watershed conservation in a fast developing country like Malaysia and many other Asian ASEAN countries, but not much systematic academic exploration has been done on it. Most work on citizen science are based on studies of activities in Western advanced countries. So what exactly is citizen science? Citizen science can be defined in many ways. Oxford Dictionary defines it as an activity where scientific work undertaken by members of the public or citizens are done in collaboration with or under the direction of professional scientists and scientific institutions. So in a way, citizen science is a move towards democratizing science and enabling broader members of citizenship to constructively use science to address sustainability issues. It is a part of the open science movement, which is a movement towards making scientific research and data accessible to more people. And this is very much driven by the advancement in big data and also the digital technology. In the context of water management, this potential is now being promoted internationally with the recent publication of a number of papers discussing the potential of citizen science in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. In the context of watershed management, this specifically refers to SDG 6 in ensuring the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. In our citizen science work, we are particularly interested in target 6.3 under SDG 6 in terms of improving water quality. So the role of citizen science for SDG here, you can see this diagram, is in terms of providing citizen-generated data to complement other sources of data. But at the moment, the focus is more on technical scientific data. So our work on place-based science is trying to broaden the perspective further by making citizen science more local, where we can also consider data connected to social science and humanities as well. Nikki, how long do I have?
5 minutes. 5 minutes?
5 minutes, okay, I'll try to be fast. Okay, so our work place-based citizen science try to broaden the perspective further by making citizen science more local and applicable, where citizen science work with researchers to collect and analyze scientific data to solve relevant to the sustainability aspirations of a particular place or local area. So this does not require only the collection of quantitative technical data or scientific data, but also more qualitative social science data. It also highlights the need to reflect the meaning behind those data in terms of local aspirations. So I think I'll just skip that part. And based on this perspective, what we have developed. Sorry, yeah. Okay, never mind. So based on this perspective, what we have done is we have developed this EcoHut Index as a hardware tool for integrated watershed management. So basically, it is based on scientific parameters, dissolved oxygen, ammoniacal nitrogen, BOD, pH, chemical oxygen demand for the suspended solids, but it is mapped according to the symbolic shape of a heart. So you're combining scientific information together with artistic and symbolic information that is more meaningful to the community. So if you sort of map it across the watershed, usually the watershed is more cleaner at the upstream, and it will go down and become more polluted. It goes down, go downstream. So what you can actually explain to the to the local communities and stakeholders is the pipe broken as it goes down the watershed. And that and kalau dalam bahasa Indonesianya boleh dikatakan sungainya sudah patah hati ya, atau dalam bahasa Malaysia juga. Jadi when we say that, it opens up this venue for conversation, right? Everyone understand patah hati, everyone understand the broken heart, and then you can sort of infuse or start discussing about why is the heart is broken, what is the impact of the broken heart. You can talk about the scientific aspects of it in explaining further. So if you're interested to know more about this work of ours, you can read the paper in the journal Ecological Indicators. We also, based on the place-based approach, we also don't think that citizen science is a standalone tool. It has to be complemented with other place-based translational interpretive materials, such as coffee table book that tells the story about the community, a video that tells a story about the community, using social media, and also groups like Water Warriors and Inspirasi Kawat to coordinate place-based activities. We are now at the process of developing a manual to develop the place-based citizen science more pragmatically on the ground. So trying to combine social science and sort of knowledge in the humanities into this more scientific and technical field of citizen science. And we have actually written a paper, and is currently under review to People of Nature, and it is a journal under the British Ecological Society with a paper entitled The Social Science Paradox in Place-Based Citizen Science, The Way Forward. And we are also on the ground, based on our work, Water Warriors and Inspirasi Kawat, trying to experiment with this approach on the ground as well. So this is my concluding insights, if I may, probably 2 minutes. So basically, to conclude, basically we are in the opinion that efforts to humanize the rapid advancement of science and technology is critical, and I hope this sharing today on the hardware research and watershed management and the place-based citizen science tool can shed some light on how this can be done pragmatically on the ground. At least based on our experience, dynamic infusion of a hardware approach to the hardware and software dimension of watershed management has enabled the advancement of science and technology to be strengthened by local cultural knowledge and shared values. This approach, however, is organic. There is no clear management strategy. The strategy which can be done in watershed communities Selangor River is very different from those in Klang River, and more so probably in watershed community here in a different country like Indonesia. But I think the main lesson that we learned at least is the importance of honing the ability of our scientific and technological community to be more sensitive or mindful to what is meaningful to the local communities and relate this to their scientific, technological, and policy processes. And place-based citizen science can provide a way to do this in a pragmatic and systematic way. And finally, as for our specific experience in developing place-based citizen science program, it has really opened our eyes that we can actually develop scientifically relevant hardware too, with close collaboration between scientists, technologists, social scientists, and local communities. By trying to understand the method of science from an interdisciplinary perspective, we can strategically infuse a more locally and culturally sensitive approach to the scientific method without reducing much of its scientific credibility. So I will end my presentation here. I hope it has provided some useful insights to the theme of the conference, and looking forward to the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zita. And I must say, was inspired by your talk on the hardware. Of course, I've been quite familiar with your idea of the hardware for at least maybe 4 to 5 years now, so I'm very happy to listen to your elaboration and further research on this. Although I must say that I don't quite understand what patah hati means. I've never experienced that before, but perhaps we can discuss that later on in the Q&A session. Yeah. Our next speaker is Farudin Majeri Maunjaya. He is the director of the Islamic Studies Center at Universitas Nasional in Jakarta. Of course, we know Dr. Maunjaya as one of the foremost scholar of Islam and ecology. He has a lot of research and activities going on with respect to green mosque, green haji, eco pesantren, eco masjid, and so on. So I'd like to invite Dr. Maunjaya, please.
Thank you, Pak Diki. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for this opportunity to talk within very famous scholars. And Diki, I would say Diki is very rajin in gathering people for the conference. So my paper and presentation will be sharing the global and practicalities of how we engage with the natural elements, because natural areas, as now we understand, become degraded, and million of forests diminish and exchange, and as well our rivers, like what Professor Zaida says, that have a sign of broken heart. We don't know in Indonesia river more broken than heart. I think it become a virus already. Thank you, Jada, for inspiring presentation. I would like to present my presentation here. I don't know where I can share. Advanced file, what is like here? I send the backup. Can someone share my slide? Because I cannot catch it here.
Okay, perhaps you can just begin, and then we will try.
Okay.
To set your presentation up. Thank you.
Yeah. All of my presentation will depend on presentation on, because it is nature. We need to experiment with nature. Also, usually you put me as a co-host. Can we manage that?
Yes, you should be able to share your presentation, if you can do it from there.
Okay.
Yes, it's starting.
Okay, now? Is it good?
Yes, perfect. Go ahead.
Yes, my presentation will be on culture and nature protection, as I am a member of IUCN World Conservation of Protected Areas Specialist Group in cultural and spiritual values of protected areas. We gathered together to determine what is not only strict protected areas such as national park and protected areas such as strict nature reserve, that we need that, and but also we need people and their culture, which is connected or related to the nature directly. As we understand, natural areas becoming rarer in civilization develop, and estimated 68% of people will be live in urban areas. So where is the nature will be? So that's why IUCN, International Union of Conservation of Nature, recommend that traditional sustainable use of natural resource can be among the protected area categories. So we also concerned that there's an important nature because of a key of human well-being. We are part of nature and we need nature to breathe. We need water. We even using the same water as maybe our prophet also using the same water is only in the closed system. So if we understand about the hydrological cycle, that all the water are not going out anywhere, so it is only recycled from part of another world and another maybe another era. So Indonesia is a part of this paper will be completely set with Jeddah in the region of Malaysia. We have a rich way in protection of nature by cultural approach, of course, and we understand that the Indonesian way is they are coming with so many terminologies and practicalities, such as nyabuk gunung. Nyabuk gunung is a practice of people in Java that they have to manage to make the mountain. They are not going to be sliding with the bunch of raining. At some time can be become a slide down and become a disaster. So they also have Subak in Bali, which is communities gathering, communities elders have to do something for the management of natural resources such as farming system, etc., etc. And Sasi in Maluku. Sasi means saksi, which is a witness. So they managed to get the natural resources for opening and for protecting perhaps 1 year to protect the nature. And Sinyumun in Kalimantan. And in this case, we concentrate on Lubuk Larangan or prohibited river in West Sumatra. If you've been to Minangkabau, you might see the nature there is beautiful, and along with that also Bukit Barisan, and along with that they are connecting rivers between province, even 4 provinces. So Lubuk Larangan spread not only in West Sumatra, they also in Riau, in Jambi, and North Sumatra. This tradition, there are thousands of Lubuk Larangan, protected rivers, that been practiced maybe 100 years ago by the Imam. It historically have relation with the Sufism history, which is protecting the resources for another period of time to let the resources develop or hatchling as saponin area in the river. So this Lubuk Larangan was submitted to IUCN to be one of the IUCN protected areas category 6, which is now in Indonesia there's a gap. There are no, as I understand, there are no governmental regulation to adopt this. So the regulation is only in the community and in the pemerintah daerah or the local government. The C category determined by IUCN as human involvement in a large factor of management. These protected area development are not intended to allow widespread industrial production. IUCN recommend that a proportion of land must remain in natural condition. A decision to be made in a national level, usually specific on each protected area. Governance has to be developed, adapt the diverse possibility growing land interests that arise from production of sustainable natural resources. In this case, the natural resources we share is about how we protect the local fish. There are about 62 local fish in West Sumatra. A lot of them are very specific from Sumatra. You have see Rosteran Padang. You will see some specific fish, small fish there, which is coming from this area of Lubuk Larangan or land of West Sumatra. West Sumatra is a province that covers 42,000 kilometers. Is a bit larger than Netherlands, but it is only 2.2% of Indonesian area, Republic of Indonesia. And we understand that the clan of Minangkabau culture have adat bersandi Sara, Sara bersandi Kitabullah, the custom based on Sharia and Sharia based on the Quran or God revelation. And the Minangkabau conservation of nature and spiritually connected because they are involving not only community but community leaders, imam, clerics, Ninik Mamak, the elders of Nagari and district and provincial level. It's also involving the most religious institution in managing nature, particularly for the Lubuk Larangan. This is interesting to understand that Minangkabau have been protect Lubuk Larangan since 100 years ago before the nature conservation was established. And these practicalities exist still now, and we understand that yes, from our previous research, because this is primary research supported by DITI, Lubuk Larangan in Sumatra is developed now. Not only 700 in 2009, but now become about up to 800 to 900 Lubuk Larangan. It's as it registered by the government, a local government, and in 7 cities and 11 districts. Even in the cities, you can still find nature and protected river, and you can see the Lubuk Larangan with rituals, and they are protected, they are respected by many large clans in West Sumatra. So this is the map. I should consult Jada. What this spotted not broken heart, right? So it's like a trees, I think, as like a flow of river. So if we can imagine this spotted, 800 spotted along this province, if we can be clumped together, it might be as long as 100 kilometers. So it's connected the rivers, because of the protection and commitment of the people. And this is making us very appreciate for the people of West Sumatra for protecting their nature and through their cultures. So our findings, this is primarily assessment. We visited the area last month, and this is fresh from the air that our finding as it is. They have a type of practice and traditional management that been applied to Bukalarangan in West Sumatra. So we see here 4 types: traditional type, semi-modern type, and modern type, and mixing both traditional and semi-modern. This is depend on the practice actually, the category, the typologies, depend on practice. For the traditional type, historically, the river is protected strictly, and historically it is a mystical. So people are fully cannot eat or catch the fish. So the fish are there forever. And it is fully protected by the community. Because of that, you are not allowed to catch or even 1 year or 2 years. It's long story because of, that we read my paper, that the traditional type was fully protected because either that the mystical history between the community and the demon historically, and also the elders who are responsible to open the lubuk was then died. So nobody, because of his authoritative tradition, nobody willing to open or to break the rule, and let all the people respect that area. So they are fully protected. Semi-modern is not historical, but involving the adat leaders. Ini mama atau opening the closing, usually 1 year, and make a penalty to whom illegally catch. The modern type of Bukalarangan appointed by community based on deliberative of the community, open without rituals. So this is modern, without ritual, and it is allowed to spread the seed of fish for spawning for the next ritual. So this kind of innovation of modern type is now spread around in West Sumatra and other areas in North Sumatra. And mixing of both traditional and semi-modern, we find that they are a similar location of one lubuk larangan strictly protected, and other allowed to. So it's mixing between traditional and semi-modern. Where you open also need ritual, but the other side of that lubuk, they have another which is strict. So like in lubuk larangan in Agam, I will show you the pictures. So this is the typology of the Bukalarangan that traditionally been there 100 years now, and you can see the fish are there, free, never be catch, and they are big. And traditionally, on the back of this is barisan. So you can see primate, you can see sometimes tigers are coming as well. And the other side is semi-modern typology, which is, to open with rituals. So this location in Lubuk Batang Raja Mahmud, and this is modern life. You can see the reapers here still natural, but they are intervention by building, I think. Yes, but they protect the fish in this Lubuk Larangan along 1 years and make a commitment when we open it. Usually prior to Ramadan or prior to Lebaran, where they are coming together to the kampung and see this Lubuk Larangan being opened traditionally. And this is the combination and traditional. In kolam atas you are protected. This protected, and this is the mosque, the masjid, the mosque that manages this Lubuk, and in the kolam. So in terminology, kolam is pool. Kolam is pool. It's not only always a river, but also pool or lakes can be protected. Okay, this is the opening of Lubuk Larangan in the community. I taken this from Kampar. Yeah. Where people also can get together, where sometimes a politician coming, they make an auction for the big fish like this, and the collection of the money is for social welfare, whether that for the masjid establishment or musala or pesantren or for the yatim, for the orphan. So this Lubuk Larangan is actually for the social and a cohesive togetherness of the people of that area to become more care with their nature. So my conclusion, there have been many natural areas that have been degraded by flow of modernization. Land and river areas could have become housing, public, and diminish the natural dimension of nature. However, the existence of local wisdom, such as Lubuk Larangan and others, can be severe, as well as develop an understanding of contact between human and nature that will certainly have a positive meaning. Maintaining Lubuk Larangan is not only a formula for maintaining ecology and ecosystem, but strengthening social integration and cohesion between communities and formal leaders, such as the government as well as the traditional elders. The practical dimension existence practice of combining nature and culture in community activities is able to inspire millions of existing people to be involved in maintaining nature and preserving sustainable of natural resources. Thank you for BT for giving us the grant for this study, and my faculty as well as Universitas Andalas Department of Biology. Thank you, Pak Diki. I stop my presentation now, and thank you for the opportunity to speak in this conference.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mangunjaya, and also Zida and Pak Rani for your very enlightening and inspiring talk. And I see some silver lining between and among all three of the presentations, and the thought that goes through all of the three thinking and research, I think. One of the things I'd like to say is that there is this growing sort of realization on the complexity of the efforts on sustainability, and also the complex sort of effort in mobilizing the sort of intellectual, political, social, and also spiritual resources in sort of forging ahead with the practice of sustainability at the community level, at the sort of people level. And I think Mbak earlier in her presentation talks about the different knowledge systems, which I also mentioned during the opening of the conference, and the kind of sort of intellectual leadership problems that we are facing amid this sort of effort to co-produce transformative forms of knowledge so that we can forge ahead with the practice of sustainability at the community level. Zida talks about the hardware of ecological sustainability and more specifically looking at how citizen science or open science can contribute to the process of sort of this new realization about the religious, spiritual and individual motivations in engaging sustainability. And Fahruddin's presentation, I think, sort of underlies the fact that if you look at the cultural practices in a number of remote areas and provinces throughout Indonesia, that you would find ultimately practices that are very contributive to not only sustainability but also natural resource management. So I think there's a whole lot of issues involved, and I think we can resort now to some of the questions. There was a question by June, which was directed to Zida. If June would like to elaborate the question, or perhaps Zida and others can try to elaborate the answer in response to that, by all means. June, would you like to elaborate the question here? Can I call on June?
Yes, yes.
Yes, can you verbalize your question, please?
About the citizen science methods, and where country were already developed, is that already for a long time? I think here Ms. Zida already answered. Thank you, Mr. Zida.
Okay,
this is US, UK, Europe, is that?
Yeah, I've sort of provided my. Yeah, thank you, June, for asking the question. I've given some, some short answer in the chat.
Yes.
Box. Yeah. But basically, citizen science is an established, sort of, a quite normal practice in the Western countries like the US, UK, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, more of the advanced countries. But it's citizen science in the sense of, scientists collaborating with citizens to collect scientific data to answer scientific questions. Yeah, and some people were saying that even Darwin was a citizen scientist if you look at it from a broader perspective. But at present, and in terms of Asian countries, Japan probably have some tradition of citizen science, but it's quite unique to much more of firefly citizen science, very specific sort of, and in terms of observing seasons and all that. So Japan is quite advanced as well, but it's not much. Not much work has been published in it about it, especially in English. So I think Japan is quite advanced in that sense, but mostly it's more in the advanced.
Who has never maybe engaged historically with this kind of term, but this is a matter of signification. I would really agree that the combination of scientific approach and the meaning-making process, I think, is very essential because we never know the different subjectivities until we communicate and deliberately take actions to grasp the different meanings that is attached to different resources. I think Fahruddin's study definitely and clearly critically engage with these kind of issues in an actual manner. Because we see the combinations of traditional, semi-modern, and the modern institutions is really reflected in the way Lubuk Larangan is managed as a common resources. And we also see the different scales of resource management. If we look at the institutionalist theories, argued that the more local the institutions is, it is much more manageable for everyone to manage, and it's much more reflective in the sense that everyone can communicate directly. I think the problem in between the science and its audience is too much intermediaries probably, so that we cannot hardly communicate directly to each other and reflecting what we have been achieved so far and what is lacked from our scientific endeavors. I think when I did some field research, I always encountered criticism. After you finish this research and within 10 years of this research, would you be able to see a difference in the community you visited? It's a very strong criticism, I think, to what extent our mobility as scientists really affect the immobile, let's say, reality when we are dealing with different cases of unsustainability practices. That's how I will respond so far, Pak Diki.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mbak Nani. And to Pak Harudin, you may also respond to this, but there is also a question more specifically by Prishadianto, who is asking essentially, how do we communicate these local values and cultures? You talk about the Sasi, the Lubuk Langgar, and other practices throughout Indonesia. And his question was also how the policymakers could also consider all of these local values, practices, and wisdom in which then could be used by the state to help the insurance of protected areas and sustainability.
Thank you, Pak Diki. This really challenge for us to find the connection between what we finding in the field research and the policy decision makers. So this kind of richness, culture, and in protecting of the nature need to be bridged to prepare the data and all that, this knowledge to share with decision maker, and how to make that then later become a national legislation, or it should be within a national regulation. So I see this is our preliminary research, that this Lubuk Larangan was not included in any policy decision making in category of in Indonesian category of protected areas. As far as we understand, there are so many regulation on that, but not mention of this Lubuk Larangan as one of the richness that should be valued nationally. But locally and regionally, as provincial level, yes, now there are some regulation within the provincial level. So we try to bridging this, and we will later on make a focus group discussion how we can bridge this gap with the policy decision making with our finding. So we will share our finding, and we will share the global guidelines such as IUCN Guide for Protected Areas of conservation, because this is also will contribute to these SDGs as well, the UN CBD, UN Convention on Biological Diversity, and we last is the Iggsci target and all the global target to protect our nature. The challenge is how we mainstreaming that and how we share then us togetherness and together with the government and decision maker put it, not only citizen science, very important as well, but also mainstreaming to the decision maker policy. So I encourage them to make policy decision that may conclude with the regulation. So output of this research is also we provide the policy papers. So it will be, given for the government as a stakeholders what is important, protecting the nature and culture.
Thank you.
Pak Diki.
Zia, what is your own experience in Malaysia and Japan in terms of transforming the local knowledge and wisdom into policies? I know in Japan, the Satayama, in the Biwako region, you have the Satayama, and how that has also been sort of transformed into a collaborative management type of arrangements in the Biwako area. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I guess there's when I mentioned about the hardware lessons that we learned very much in the context of the Lake Biwa case. One was the reflective multi-level science policy interface. It's very dynamic in the sense that, and also the leadership was just astounding in the sense that the governor of Shiga Prefecture was an environmental sociologist. And she was the one who did research on, all the, local values of, Lake Biwa, like what Dr. Pak Fakruddin has done. And just imagine like Pak Fakruddin becoming the governor.
Amen.
Yeah, okay. So she was a professor, and then she became a politician. And I think during her, she also has, very good connection in terms of, Professor Nakamura has been involved in this for a long time and they are good friends. I think there are a lot of, that background story that we don't see in terms of the, very close relationship and informal relationship as well between the different decision makers and stakeholders. So that is the specific case of Lake Biwa, but I think it can be emulated in the sense that one of the things that we were inspired of, you look at the Mother Lake document for Lake Biwa, that is on the watershed governance of Lake Biwa, but you can see that the starting of that policy document was a poem. And they talk about the spiritual part of, the social, cultural connection of, Lake Biwa with the community before they go into the technical part. I mean, the Japanese are very good at looking at, technical and scientific solution to, all these environmental problems, but somehow they are able to use these, poetic language together with, the technical and scientific as well. So if you look at the local communities as well, they are, if you look at the citizen scientists in Lake Biwa, a number of them are retirees, they are professionals, they used to be, leaders of businesses, and professionals, but they later on became citizen scientists, and they are very sophisticated in terms of their knowledge as well, and that's why they are able to communicate the local concerns to the decision makers as well. So I think that part of the cultural, and I'm not a very, I'm not into cultural studies, but understanding the actors as well is also very important. But if I relate that to the learning points to Malaysia, so for example, those people who are involved in this consortium before, one of them is our current Secretary General for the Ministry of Environment and Water, Datuk Sri Zaini Ujang. So he has started to emulate that. That's why he's very poetic now. So he's, writing poems about, water, about river, using social media and all that. And I am excited to see how he is going to sort of lead this movement towards combining, a more humanistic approach to conservation together with the much more technical and, scientific approach.
Great, thank you. But Rani, do you see our policymakers having any blind spots with respect to local knowledge, wisdom, and sort of the spiritual resources that are out there, and the sort of incapacity for them to transform that into policies and sort of governance structures on the ground? I mean, I don't know of any policymakers in Indonesia who can write poems or read poems for that matter.
Pantun.
Oh, pantun. Mbak Rani?
Thank you, Mas Diki. Yes, it's problematic. We are talking about how science is communicated at different levels with different audience, and we can consider that our relations matter so much in this regard. The story that Pak Mahyudin just said reminded us that the role of scientific institutions is very selective in deciding what kind of way of knowing deserves policy advocacy, and it is integrated explicitly in the regulatory documents. So I would say that yes, there are many loopholes in the way science is communicated, and we're talking here to relate with Igssci's point that we sometimes can relate to rely on the leadership of the public figures, politicians who happen to be developing the shared ecological values and deliberately use that in the everyday practice. But we also see that the status quo that is very difficult to change, and I think in this regard we really need to relate to the concept of citizenship much more strongly. I think place-based citizen science is an avenue in which you can advance this kind of agenda, how the grassroots communities can explicitly challenge these unequal structures in the case of representation, and how the meaning-making process can continuously be inserted into any academic debate, I think is a very important starting point for us to talk about structural transformation. If the situation with our institution is still, it has so many gaps in delivering local knowledge and representing local knowledge and local wisdom. And maybe we need to have stronger democratic approach in this regard, but it's not enough, I think, to just have democracy without having a political economic critics in which, yes, to a certain extent, we profit a lot from our scientific endeavors in many ways, and you should question how the redistributive aspects of this kind of profit making the scientific institutions adds to the existing inequality problems. Thank you, Ms. Vicky.
Thank you. We have another 10 minutes, and there's a question by Selvi Priami Kula. Yesterday was the World Water Day with the theme Valuing Water, and I think many of your presentations also touched upon bodies of water and how we have fairly sort of undervalued the water resources and the ecological impacts that have affected the quality of water. Of course, Zita mentioned that water is also part of the SDGs. So how could we relate this also to the COVID-19 pandemic and the centrality of perhaps water within the context of maybe Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Japan, and elsewhere? Dr. Fadruddin?
Thank you, Diki. Yes, our relation with nature reflects the harmonization of how we respect the nature. Then why this COVID become pandemic? Because our standing to nature was very weak, I think. We have a disciplinary study on human relation, human bond to nature. It's called biophilia by E.O. Wilson. You can search it in there, which is trying to connect still human with their nature in a harmonious way. There are about 9 biophilia values. With on the other way, some human then really depend on the nature, but they catch everything in the nature, they bring it at home, or they are utilizing the nature, so domionistic values, and catching the bird, primate, bring that to home, or even consume it. So that is why this pandemic comes to the human. They should be in their place, in their habitat, and we can see them in the natural way. And by that, we have also a concern that we need awareness that the study of animal wildlife trade and not animal consumption is really need to be studied because it is dangerous for the human life. We are part of nature, and we understand up to now, as I know, they are still debating where is the COVID coming from, whether is that from the pangolin, from the trading pangolin from the wet market in Wuhan, or they are also debating about from the bat, because 80% of zoonosis that spread to human is coming from the animal. This is including SARS, this including this COVID, I believe, this is not altered by human, they're coming from the nature. So our understanding, we have to make a distance from the nature. We have to understand our nature as we are part of nature. Otherwise, we might diminish our race. See what the first speaker say. Also, the leaders of the world are also fail in some state, almost 100 states now, cannot manage this COVID, even the small things that coming from other part of the animal perhaps. So we need to concern this, and we need to raise an awareness for our people, our college, that we are part of nature, we have to living harmoniously with nature. Thank you, Pak Diki.
Yeah, Zita, you mentioned that you found washing machines in the Klang River, and in Jakarta we could also find sofas and kasur tables and all kinds of things floating on the river side. And I was thinking about Tasicini and how that has also the dying lake in the state of Pahang, which you have also researched on. Would you like to just mention how this World Water Day and the awareness of it, or lack thereof, has really affected how the water qualities and the bodies of water, different bodies of waters, have been neglected?
Yeah, and I just would like to also extend, the discussion by Papa Pudin just now about the underlying reason why COVID actually happened. Talking about our relationship with nature and how we are, becoming quite distant in terms of our interaction with our natural world. And one of the, and you were saying about, when I mentioned about having washing machine, floating in the river, that really question about the question, just raised the question about how do we see the river? And one of the concepts that I've learned from my interaction with the Japanese researchers as well is the idea of near water and far water. Increasingly, we are far water. When we talk about our, where our water come from, usually we think that it comes from the pipe. Nobody knows which river does the water comes from, or which groundwater, or which lake does it come from. So we don't have that kind of relationship. And one of the hardware approach that I have learned as well is to bring back that relationship. If you actually have a connection with the river, which I think in the past we did. For example, in the watershed community that I was doing work with, they still, if they go to the river, they still ask permission. And we don't do that anymore. We don't have that connection with the river. So I think just to bring that up in terms of bringing that idea of stewardship to the river and the value of the river as well, which is very important. But in terms of pragmatic, how do you call it, approach to how we want to celebrate the World Water Day, I think one of the things that we can do is to do, one is we are mostly working from home, and we do what we can in our own backyard. So if your river is at the back of your house, then make sure you take care of that river. Or if you spend a lot of time in the house, make sure you conserve the water that you use. So I think the pandemic, you don't move a lot, so make sure that you do what you can in your area of influence. And another thing that I think I want to raise in terms of valuing water, one of the things that we realized that is during the MCO, during the movement control order, there was less human activity, and at least in Malaysia, we have observed that the river is cleaner because there was less, human activity as well during that time. But now that the activity is actually, happening again, the river is, there's a lot of occurrences of pollution as well. So that is also a question on how COVID-19 is showing us about the impact of our everyday action. And I think it's really a good motto that we have, this valuing water, because it really questions how our activity is actually affecting the way in which the value of water is actually translated on the ground. So I don't know, Pak Diki, so that is my quick answer to that.
Okay. Thank you. I'm not quite sure whether Mbak Rani is still there. Mbak Rani, are you still around?
I'm here. I just lost my connection, but I'm back.
Yeah. Would you like to comment on perhaps the last question?
Thank you. I think when we talk about the value of water as well as the way we are dealing with this pandemic, I think we need to really reflect on this problem of consumerism, I think, yeah. In many ways, we have contributed to the increasing amount of pollution. And this is very much related to the way we use industrial goods as part of our everyday life. I think the best way to reflect on this occasion is to see how ourselves individually trying to change the planet by changing ourselves. We need to also relate to these aspects of the stewardship because water that we have now is something that is also valuable for the future generations. And to what extent we can continue to diversify our ways of knowing. In the last 3 years, I've been researching about rain harvesting method developed at grassroots communities, and I find it very interesting to see how rain water resources is something that we have been neglecting quite much. And this community called Bening, they process it into drinking water, healthy drinking water, and many people actually benefit from that. So we're looking at from an optimist perspective, the capability of human being to develop solidarity, to strengthen the social capital, but also to have a strong self-reflection in the way we will address the imbalances in our social structure. And if we talk about clean water access, I think in every country there are still statistics showing the disparity of access and control over clean water resources. And if we look at the way pandemic is affecting us, I think the same logic, we also need to think of how we are treating the so-called the commons that is part of our future. I think that will be my response. Ms. Diki?
Thank you very much. And I guess for the last and final question, I'll just pose this to Fahrudin from Sister Johanna. She's asking about the Hutan Tutupan. Perhaps you might have some responses to this.
Thank you. There's so many ways to protect, including the hutan tutupan. However, there already scheme in the government because forest is regarding the ownership of the government is very dominant. So what we need is the exact whether that hutan tutupan will be managed by the communal or community of adat or something we have to determine. So we need to help them because they are in somewhere the adat cannot making a mapping, good mapping, for example. So they are activists, NGOs, academia should be go down to the earth, see where is their areas, and help them to advocate to the government because there have been a law on under the system on perhutanan sosial that you can make it legally and respected by the government to make that legally being not at the time if you protect it. Sometimes it can be a concession of a company. So you need to guarantee that, and you need to advocate the local people. Where is your area? Where is your area of fishing? Your area of gardening, and etc. etc. Because we need a legal aspect of that. So need help to determine that. Of course, to connect that with the Dirjen Hutanan Sosial of Hutanan. Thank you for that. I think so.
Okay, thank you for that. With that, I would like to close this session, but I do hope that the three of you, I think, should collaborate on some fine projects in the future, and I think that would really be contributed to this whole debate and field around religion and culture, the hardware, and ecological sustainability. So with that, I would like to give the floor now to the MC. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for Pak Diki and those three speakers. It was really an insightful session for us. And for all the participants of this conference, please fill up the attendance form if you haven't filled it yet. And now we will have a break for 30 minutes. After 1 hour, okay, 1 hour. And the break, I would like to ask you, after the break, I would like to ask you to join our first parallel session that are divided into 6 panels. You can choose the panels that you are interested in ugm.id/IGSSCI 2021. I will repeat, ugm.id/IGSSCI 2021. And at 13:35, there will, and then we will enter the first panels, and we will see you there. Thank you very much.